My husband is just some amateur who sold old code ages ago. Trust me. My wife laughed to impress her boss, secretly using the software I built. She never expected that this outdated man would be the one to end her career. We were standing in the middle of her housewarming party, which looked like a mausoleum of marble and glass. Her new company had just relocated its regional headquarters. Her new boss, the one with the slicked-back hair and the permanent mocking smile, had just finished a speech about vision and speed. The investors were wandering around drinking wine that cost more than my suit. And when one of them, a real estate guy with a Rolex tan, pointed at me and asked, "Is this your husband?" she laughed out loud. "Ah, he's just here?" And just like that, my marriage became the punchline to a joke. I didn't say a word, didn't smile, didn't flinch. I put down my drink, nodded as if I were going to the bathroom, and walked out through the sliding doors into the night. The lawn was lit by small solar lamps. Her voice echoed behind me. Something about synergy. I could still smell her perfume in the cool air. I took out my phone, one number, without hesitation. "It's time," I said. "My lawyer." Rich answered in a low voice. "Time for what? Cancel the acquisition, citing a conflict of interest." There was a pause. "Are you serious? She works there now." Silence. The kind of silence where lawyers recalculate figures in their heads and try not to sound too eager. Rich cleared his throat. Clause 14b. Clause 14b. Confirm. Allow me to pause here for a second, because you've made it this far. Yes, you who are swiping on your screen during your lunch break or listening while you drive. More than 90% of you don't follow me, and I get it. But it really helps the team if you press that subscribe button. We put all our effort into stories like this. So if you're here, stay now. Back to the patio. I ended the call with 2 words. Make noise. I stood there for a moment, watching my breath fog up in the air and taking in the sharp contrast between her overfunded arrogance and the reality that was about to come crashing down from the side. The company she joined with glee, triumphalism, and arrogance was 2 weeks away from finalizing the acquisition of its crown jewel, a logistics optimization platform that was going to revolutionize their entire internal infrastructure, automate dispatches, eliminate losses, forecast fuel expenditure by the hour. The platform that I built, the platform I licensed under strict transfer rules, and the same platform now frozen because my wife, in her hurry to climb the ladder, forgot that ladders only work if someone holds them steady. I went back to the window. No one had missed me. She was laughing again. Her hand brushed against her boss's sleeve. He smiled. Too close. Too comfortable. I realized in that second, not just the betrayal, not just the lack of respect, but the performance. She had rewritten the narrative of her life, and I was no longer a chapter. I was material for a footnote, an uncredited cameo. Fine. Let them toast to their impending dominance. Let her smirk as she tells her story of starting from scratch. I was done reacting. No more fights. Just cold, legal, final decisions. I turned around and walked towards the car. While she toasted synergy inside, I was detonating Clause 14b outside. In the morning, she wouldn't be laughing. By Monday, her acquisitions team would be in full panic mode. And the next time someone asked who he is, she would choke on the answer. 10 years ago, I slept 4 hours a night and ate anything that didn't require a plate. She was still in college getting her second degree in another state, and I was neck deep in warehouse data building something I didn't even know had value yet. I didn't have a team. I had a laptop with a broken hinge and a whiteboard covered in overlapping arrows. What I built wasn't flashy, it didn't have a cool name, but it worked. It made mid-sized logistics companies operate like Amazon. Inventory balancing, dispatch routing, fuel efficiency curves, boring stuff for most people, but not for the people losing money hand over fist on moving goods. The software made decisions based on real-world variables like weight, driver fatigue, regional traffic trends, and even weather projections. It wasn't sexy, it was just brutally efficient, and then I sold it quietly. Just the licensing rights. I retained ownership under an LLC I created specifically for it. A shell entity that existed for a single purpose, to protect the intellectual property and its revenue terms. Clause 14b. The one everyone overlooks made it non-transferable if a direct connection existed between my LLC and any employee, executive, or consultant of the acquiring party. I wrote that clause myself in a sleep-deprived fit of paranoia. I never imagined I would invoke it. She never asked where the money came from, Not once. She just celebrated the day Sally Mae stopped calling and posted a selfie with a mimosa with the caption, "MBA, here I come. Bree Sparkles." I remember sitting across from her at that brunch. She was wearing sunglasses that made her look like someone I hadn't met yet. That money came from the first licensing agreement, a 5-year contract with a regional trucking company based in Chicago. I used the second agreement to cover our down payment. The third agreement paid her tuition in full, and still she never asked why I never complained about expenses. It didn't bother me. Then I was proud. I wanted her to rise. But now she works for a company that just spent 6 months negotiating an acquisition they think is clean. I saw their keynote presentation 2 weeks ago. The CEO talking about smart bin pivots and proprietary routing technology that will become the industry standard. They had a slide with a roadmap. My color-coded roadmap stolen from a white paper I wrote 7 years ago, and she joined their product team last month just in time to be assigned to the integration implementation. Imagine that. Of course, no one in that room knows who the real owner of the licensing rights is. They don't know about the clause. They don't know that under the code, any undisclosed conflict before due diligence voids a pending deal and triggers personal liability if damages occur after implementation. But I know and my lawyer knows. And now, thanks to that dismissive laugh at the party, the clause that has been gathering dust is about to become a wrecking ball. I spent the next morning going through our documents, original license terms, amendments, auto-renewals, email chains, the LLC's profit and loss statement. It was all there. The silent, boring proof of ownership. She never saw any of it. She was too busy playing a new version of herself. It's not that I want to destroy her. That would suggest I still feel something. This isn't about revenge, it's about correction. I let her build a tower on my foundation. She forgot to check who still held the deed. Let her boss make his moves. Let the team meetings sparkle. They're standing on my architecture. And if they don't move, Clause 14B will turn their 6-month acquisition into a public embarrassment in 6 hours. The best part, they don't even know my name yet. Monday morning, the conference room smelled like burnt coffee and printer toner. A weirdly comforting scent, considering we were about to detonate a bomb under an 8-figure deal. Rich sat across from me, his sleeves rolled up, glasses perched on the end of his nose, scanning a stack of acquisition documents like a bloodhound with a law degree. His office was Spartan, no assistant, no espresso machine, just a massive bookshelf filled with state codes and a small ceramic frog on the windowsill. He only smiled when something bled. He tapped a page with his pen. There it is. Clause 14B. Third line. I leaned in. My own words from years ago stared back at me in courier font, slightly warped from a bad scan. In the event that an employee, executive, consultant, or direct family member of the acquiring entity currently holds, or intends to hold any position related to the licensor's product or its application, the agreement shall be formally re-evaluated prior to closing. Failure to disclose such a connection voids this contract and invokes clawback rights. Rich looked up, one eyebrow raised. You want to confirm again when your wife was on board? Last Thursday, I said. They announced it on LinkedIn. Thrilled to welcome Jessica Street as a product strategy consultant who is now joining us as Director of Platform Development. He let out a low chuckle. They always brag online before they check for landmines. I slid a folder across the table, her onboarding packet, the NDA, the employment contract, internal screenshots from SAC. She was already looped into the integration team within 48 hours. She's even listed as a stakeholder on their tour board. Rich exhaled slowly, so they made her a decision maker and a disclosure risk in the same week. Amateurs, and they think they're buying my code? He nodded with a small, appreciative dip of his head. Well, not anymore. He picked up his phone and called his paralegal, the AIN. Send the formal hold to Higuar and Company. Cite breach of Clause 14B. Conflict of interest due to undisclosed spousal employment effective immediately. Request full clawback. Mark it urgent. I leaned back in the chair, my hands folded, my pulse steady. This was the point of no return, not just legally, but psychologically. Once Rich hit send, the gears would start turning. Lawyers would wake up in a cold sweat. Slack channels would get renamed. Calendars would go dark, and her name, her smiling, friendly PR name, would be the keyword that triggered it all. You want me to notify them gently? Rich asked. Or go for the jugular? I didn't hesitate. The jugular. We watched as the draft email appeared on the shared screen. Subject urgent. Breach of Clause 14b. Immediate action required inside. Clean language. No accusations, no threats, just facts. And at the end, a line I wrote myself almost a decade ago. Clawback will be considered formal upon digital receipt. Ownership remains with the licensor until renegotiation is approved. Rich hit send. That was it. Just a click, no fireworks, no yelling. But somewhere, at that very moment, a junior associate at Highward & Company was probably getting an alert they didn't understand. A project manager was seeing a calendar event titled Acquisition Hold. Emergency call pop up, and an executive in a corner office in a skyscraper was staring at their phone with that slow, dawning sense that something had gone very, very wrong. Back in our quiet little room, Rich leaned back satisfied. They'll try to blame someone. Eventually they'll track it back to her. And when they do, I said, they'll ask her why she never disclosed that her husband was the original architect. Which, Rich added, is going to sound especially bad when her Slack messages mention your name like you're some washed-up coder who got lucky with an LLC. I smiled slowly and evenly. It was never luck. He nodded. Domino number 1. Now we wait. Except I wasn't planning on waiting. I was planning on going back to our house that night, as if nothing had happened, to sit down to dinner while she told me about the onboarding drama and the new software policies. And I would nod, maybe even pour wine, let her talk. Let her gloat, because the trap wasn't just legal, it was personal. And the only thing more satisfying than watching them scramble was knowing she wouldn't even see it coming until it was too late. She came home that night practically vibrating. Her heels clicked on the hardwood like applause, her coat still slung over one shoulder as she launched into a monologue halfway through the front door. You wouldn't believe how fast they're moving, she gushed. They've already looped me into the implementation schedule. They said I had a natural authority in the room. I stood by the stove stirring the mushroom risotto, her favorite. I didn't flinch. I didn't smile. I added the broth slowly in silence. They're calling it Project Tusk, she said, hopping onto the kitchen island like she always did when she was in campaign mode. I know. Terrible name, right? But the numbers are insane. The circuit told me off the record this is projected to cut ops costs by 38% within a year. 38%. That's hundreds of millions. She poured herself some wine. Didn't ask if I wanted any. That had become routine lately. Little things that used to be signals of partnership, now replaced by her momentum. They have no idea what hit them, she said, smiling over the rim of the glass. They thought they were hiring a mid-level strategist. Within a week, I'm already leading implementation calls. I nodded. Smart move. She didn't catch the tone. She didn't hear the low hum under those two words. Smart move for me. Because earlier that day, while she was busy dazzling half the company, my LLC's legal team had sent a cease and desist order to their bin development vendor. Simple language, very specific. All implementation, integration, or derivative use of the IP known internally as the TUSC platform is to be halted immediately pending legal review of license compliance and third-party entanglement, as defined in Clause 14b. I could have told her. I could have stood in the kitchen, thrown a copy at her, watched her face crumble. But what would be the point? She didn't even realize the contract her company was depending on came from our bank account. She didn't realize the man she'd publicly minimized was the same one who'd written the very algorithm she was now trying to rebrand under her corporate banner. She was high on proximity, on titles, on the Linden buzz, on the internal Slack applause. That look in her eyes was someone who believed they had finally left the old life behind. Me included. Are you okay? She asked, hopping off the counter and walking over. You're very quiet. Long day, I said. She kissed my cheek like someone signing off on an email. Not really present, not really seeing. You're going to laugh? She added, leaning against the fridge. But you know that software you used to tinker with? The Route Planner. MHM. Well, it's crazy. The core engine of this whole project is almost identical to what you built. I mean, they've refined it obviously, but it's still like a Didgebiloo. Weird, right? I allowed myself a smile. A small one. Weird. She tossed it off like an anecdote, as if she'd just seen my initials on a street sign. And that's when I knew I didn't need to raise my voice or threaten. I didn't need to expose her that night. She was already tangled in her own rope, talking faster, dreaming bigger, building a public image that was about to crack wide open. She didn't ask what I'd done that day. She never asked anymore, not about the LLC, not about the code base, not about the name I used on contracts. That was her real mistake. Not the petulance, not the ambition, not even the boss's sleeve she lingered on. It was forgetting that silence isn't empty, it's storage. I sat across from her at the table, handed her a plate. "You're going to love them," I said. She smiled like she'd already won. And across town, in a different boardroom, a group of very nervous men were now reviewing the cease and desist order with pale faces, wondering how they'd missed me completely. The room was all glass and chrome, floor-to-ceiling windows, a polished table the size of a small yacht, bottled water arranged like trophies. She wasn't expecting the meeting. One minute she was drafting integration notes with her team. The next she was asked politely, but firmly, to step into the conference room, the one they use for shareholders and crises. She knew. She tried to hide the shift in her posture as she walked in, tried to keep the click of her heels steady, her jaw relaxed. But the moment she stepped through the door, the temperature changed. The CEO was already sitting at the head of the table, his hands folded, his mouth a tight line. The co sat to his right, spinning a pen in slow, methodical circles. Legal counsel was there too. Andrea Watts, her name, with a red folder and an expression like she'd already written the exit memo. None of them said a word. Her boss came in last. He looked wrecked, pale, like he'd just come back from identifying a body. He was holding his phone like it was radioactive. "Close the door, please," the CEO said. She did. Her boss didn't sit down, didn't look at her, just set the phone on the table, tapped the screen, and turned up the volume. "This is a formal notification of contractual breach under Clause 14B, as defined in the 2015 licensing agreement filed by Sentinel Shelf LLC dated March 3rd. Any ongoing or derivative planning implementation related to the platform herein referred to as TUS must cease immediately. Failure to comply will constitute grounds for legal action, including retroactive penalties under the Federal Intellectual Property Act and state-level disclosure statutes." The voice was calm, clinical, but final. She felt her legs go weak. "What does your husband do again?" the CEO said after the recording finished. She swallowed. "He used to run a small tech company. Nothing major. Sold it years ago. I didn't think. Did he ever mention owning the intellectual property behind the software we just spent 6 months preparing to acquire?" Her breath caught. "I didn't know it was his." Her boss finally looked up. His voice. "The LLC's Sentinel Shelf is his, right?" She hesitated. Yes, I think so, but he hasn't worked on that in years. He's not involved in this." The co-spun his pen one more time. "You're listed as a stakeholder on the TUSP integration board. You approved the Ben's alignment with its legacy code last week." "I didn't know it was his," she said louder than she intended. "No one said it was connected. It was just routing logic, optimization chains." "It's not branded because he never sold it with branding," the lawyer interjected, speaking at last. "We've reviewed the original license. It was anonymized through LLC transfers airtight on identity shielding. But the math, the structure, that's his. And your name appears on 6 internal memos referencing that implementation as legacy adjacent, which is legally enough to establish knowledge." She shook her head. "No, I didn't think. He never told me." The CEO stood up slowly. "How long have you been married?" 8 years. "And in those 8 years you never once asked where the money for your degree came from?" Silence. Her boss rubbed his forehead. "They're freezing the project. The entire implementation halted. The investors are already asking questions. Legal wants to do a full compliance review, which means they're going to pull every single communication you've had with the integration team and with him." Her voice was small now. "It was just dinner table talk. I didn't leak anything. They'll be the judge of that," the lawyer said. "But I would advise you not to speak to anyone else about this until we conclude the internal review, including your husband." That last word landed like a slap. The husband, the one she joked about, the one she dismissed, the one she referred to just 2 days ago as just here. He was everywhere now, on their servers, in their contracts, in their legal liabilities. He'd made one quiet call, and everything had started to unravel. And she finally realized something she should have remembered a long time ago. He wasn't loud. He didn't need to be. He just had to wait for the glass to break. The press release went out at 8:14 a.m. sharp. Strategic acquisition suspended pending review due to unforeseen contractual complexities. Our integration of the Tusk platform will be temporarily paused while internal and legal assessments are conducted. We remain committed to operational excellence and transparency. Corporate jargon for we just stepped on a landmine and someone is about to take the blame. She read the headline from her phone while still in bed. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. Then the email started. Subject urgent, Tusk project hold. Subject, emergency call legal review. Subject did you know about this? She was brushing her teeth when the Slack messages came in, short, measured, but unmistakably tinged with suspicion. Hey, saw the release. You okay? You were leading the implementation, right? Wasn't it you who onboarded the routing logic team? She didn't reply. Not yet. She needed to get to the office to fix this in person. By the time she arrived, the glass walls that once made her feel important now felt designed for containment. She could see everyone, but the air between them was different. No greetings, no smiles. People looked away when she passed their desks. Her ID card still worked, but the weight of it around her neck felt heavier than it had 2 days ago. Her boss found her in the break room, pouring stale coffee into a paper cup she didn't want. He didn't mince words. Why didn't you disclose your connection? She froze. What? To the platform? To the intellectual property. To him. I didn't know it was his, she said too quickly. Jessica, he said quietly. You signed a spousal disclosure form 2 weeks ago. I don't remember that. He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, showed her a scanned document with her signature at the bottom. Standard Onboarding Clause 5.6. It asks clearly about any known familial or spousal ties to vendors, partners, or IP-related entities under acquisition review. You answered. None. She felt her stomach clench. I didn't think it mattered, she said. I didn't know he still had anything to do with it. We haven't talked about his work in years. He didn't argue, just looked at her like a man watching something unravel in real time. The board is freezing all your involvement in internal projects effective immediately. I'm sorry. You can't be serious. Legally serious. HR serious. Investor serious. We just had a valuation meeting based on a product we might not legally be allowed to touch. The only reason they're not using words like fraud yet is because we're still investigating. I didn't do anything wrong, she said, trying to summon the confident voice that used to charm boardrooms. It came out weak, uncertain. I didn't know what he still had. But you knew what he was, he said, and that landed like a knife. You just didn't think it mattered, and then he left her there half a coffee, full-blown panic. By lunch, her calendar had been wiped. Project invites revoked, Slack permissions silently updated. Her access to the Tuska integration board was gone. All internal communications related to the platform now had a new tag, restricted, legal review only. And she sat at her desk, surrounded by silence as the office moved on without her. The woman they praised last week was now a liability no one wanted to touch. Every conversation felt half volume when she walked by. The intern who used to ask her for advice now wouldn't meet her eyes. The director of HR gave her a look she couldn't quite decipher, but it was more pity than concern. And through it all, not a single message from him, not a word. She didn't even know where he was, which, for the first time in their marriage, terrified her. She walked through the door like a storm that has lost its thunder. No dramatic slam, just a quiet push. The keys barely made it to the hook. Her bag dropped to the floor with a dull thud, and she stood in the foyer for a beat too long, as if unsure she still lived here. I was in the kitchen with a French press in one hand and a ceramic mug in the other, calm, measured. The morning light caught the steam rising off the counter like something holy. She saw me, and for a moment her face crumpled with something I hadn't seen in a long time. Fear. Not the weepy, dramatic kind, but the still kind. The one that only shows up when someone realizes they've gone too far, past the line they didn't bother to see. What did you do? She asked. I didn't answer right away. I poured my coffee, added a dash of cinnamon, a habit, and took a sip. Then I looked at her without blinking. You told them I was just here. Another sip. So I left. She looked around as if maybe something in the room would confirm I was joking, that the walls were still hers. The rug, the art on the walls, the mahogany bookshelf she'd selected piece by piece. But the difference wasn't in the furniture. It was on the table a plain, cream-colored folder, the kind you find at a notary's office labeled in my handwriting asset transfers. Her hands didn't move, but her eyes locked onto it as if it might explode. I don't understand, she said, her voice breaking at the edge. You wouldn't, I said. You never asked. She walked over slowly as if afraid it would vanish if she blinked. She opened the folder, read the first page, then the second, then back to the first. Her breath hitched. The house, the car, the investment accounts, my name and mine alone, under the trust's controlling entity. A legal restructuring dated 3 months ago, back when she started acting like she was auditioning for a role in someone else's life. You moved everything? Yes. Her hands were shaking. Now you can't do that. I did, but my name's on it. It was until it wasn't. The folder included notarized documents. She recognized my lawyer's name, the same man who helped us buy the place, the same man who walked me through Clause 14B while she was picking out tile samples. I paid for the down payment, she said weakly, grasping for ground that no longer existed. With money from a licensing deal you never asked about. That's not fair. Fair would have been honesty, I said, still quiet. Fair would have been not pretending I was your shadow while you played visionary at dinner parties. I never said. You said it with your tone, with your timing. With every time you called me. Just here in front of someone you wanted to impress. She sank into a chair, the same one she used to use while browsing job listings, deciding which company would look best on her resume. What now? She whispered. That depends on whether you're finally ready to acknowledge which name built the floor under your feet. She didn't answer, just stared at the folder as if it had teeth, and in a way it did, because it wasn't just paper. It was the first time she'd seen the consequences of treating me like a piece of furniture in writing. The legal reality of what happens when you forget that the quiet ones are still building even while you're busy performing. The house wasn't hers anymore, not legally, not emotionally. And now, she finally understood. Silence isn't an absence, sometimes it's planning. By Wednesday, the calls stopped coming in. Correction. Some calls stopped. The ones from her boss, from HR, from the internal review team. Those slowed to a trickle and then vanished completely. No updates, no meetings, no invites to join the all-hands emergency Zoom, where everyone but her was given the next steps. But the one call she did get was from her mother, and it hit harder than any HR memo. I just saw that article, her mother said. Sina, no pleasantries, just immediate impact, like a slap through the phone. Is it true? Jessica closed the blinds before she answered. What part? That the software your company tried to buy belonged to your husband, that he filed some legal block, and now the deal is frozen. Jessica paced. It's complicated. No, it's not. Her mother snapped. You're married. He paid for your MBA. I told you not to take advantage of him back then. Jessica stopped pacing. What are you talking about? Her mother scoffed. Please, you think I believed you were working 2 jobs and still came out of Stanford with no debt? You think I didn't notice the upgraded apartment, the dinners, the tuition disappearing? You never said how, and I stopped asking because I thought maybe, just maybe, you'd finally found someone supportive. Turns out you did. And you never asked where the money came from. Jessica said nothing. Her mother exhaled sharply. You wanted a husband who would stay quiet and clap when told? Well, you got him until he stopped. Then the click dial tone. The next hit was quieter. Her group chat, once buzzing with inside jokes and pictures of espresso martinis, had gone silent. 3 unread messages. All from her, no replies. The last message from anyone else was 5 days ago, before the housewarming party, when she'd posted a filtered picture of herself in the new office's elevator mirror with the caption, Making Moves Rocket. Now nothing. She opened Instagram. The notifications had dwindled to a trickle. Someone had untagged her from a photo at last month's conference. A former colleague she'd once mentored posted a story from the team retreat in Lake Tahoe. Jessica hadn't been invited. They'd called it a logistics leadership retreat and hadn't even bothered to pretend she was welcome. She scrolled further, found a comment under one of the company's posts from a well-known industry vendor. Wow, for a company like this to not vet their acquisition risks. You'd think someone on the team would have flagged the IP conflicts beforehand. No names, but everyone in the industry would know. The logistics world was small, everyone knew everyone, and the whisper networks brutal. One of the developers she used to work with, Ben, a soft-spoken guy with a dry sense of humor, had posted a tweet that morning. Funny how the quiet coders always end up being the landmines. Respect the ones who are still building in the background. They own more than you think. It had over 800. I like. Jessica put her phone down and sat in silence. Not the kind that comes with peace, but the kind that wraps around your throat like plastic. The email from legal was still unread. Subject, compliance inquiry, notice of access restrictions. She couldn't bring herself to open it. Even the walls of the house felt strange now. Too sterile, too curated. A museum of things she had chosen, but never really owned. And somewhere inside that house, maybe in the basement, maybe in the attic, maybe buried on a backup drive, was the code she used to laugh about, the one he built late at night, alone while she was telling him to take a break or do something normal for once. Now that code had taken her job, her reputation, her credibility, and none of her connections were answering anymore. She was suddenly, impossibly alone. The kind of alone you can't pretty up with a filter. She wore her best blouse, ironed it twice, paired it with pearl earrings and nude heels. Quiet, professional, forgettable, exactly how HR liked it. The last time she walked into the boardroom dressed like this was for her onboarding meeting. Her boss had made a joke about rising stars, and someone from HR had said, "We're expecting big things." This time no one joked. The long table stretched before her like a tribunal. Legal counsel sat at the far end, flanked by HR on one side and the co on the other. Her boss wasn't in his usual seat. He was off to the side, no notepad in hand, not looking up. No one offered coffee. Jessica, the lawyer, began. "Thank you for coming in. This won't take long. No greeting, no small talk, straight to it. We're conducting a compliance review regarding your involvement with the TUS project. Before we proceed, we need clarity on one critical point." Jessica nodded, her jaw tight. The lawyer folded her hands. "Did you knowingly influence internal priorities, strategic or technical, while being aware that your spouse had historical or legal ownership ties to the intellectual property being acquired?" Jessica froze. "I didn't know he still owned it." She said carefully, "We're married, but we've been financially separate for years. I haven't seen any statements. I wasn't part of his LLC." "That's not what we asked," the HR rep cut in, her voice sharp. "We're asking if you were at any point aware of his past or current involvement with the underlying platform." Jessica glanced towards her boss. Nothing. No expression, just notes. She tried again. "He's a developer. He tinkered, but I always assumed he'd moved on. I never saw contracts." "He never." Legal counsel stepped in. "You used the term legacy adjacent in multiple internal memos. That's not a term casual observers use. It's technical, implies familiarity. I learned it in our vendor meetings." "Did your husband ever discuss the licensing terms with you? Are you unsure?" "Yes." The lawyer tapped her tablet. A few seconds later, a printed page slid across the table from the HR rep's folder. Slack messages, highlighted. Jessica stared at her own words in gray bubbles. "Let's fast-track this. The vendor is a non-issue. My husband is just a hobbyist who sold some code 1,000,000 years ago. Trust me, this isn't conflict territory. He doesn't even know we're using it." Her chest tightened. She'd forgotten about that. She'd said it quickly during a late-night sprint meeting, trying to impress the circuit and keep momentum. She never thought those messages would surface. Not like this. The lawyer waited. "Do you consider those statements appropriate given what has now come to light?" "I didn't mean." "We know what you meant," HR said flatly. "That's the problem." Her boss finally spoke low and without emotion. "We're voting to place you on indefinite administrative leave effective immediately, pending the results of the final audit." Jessica blinked. "That's it. We'll be updating your access permissions within the hour. You'll receive a follow-up notice from HR by the end of the day." There was no theater, no raised voices, just process. She stood. No one looked at her. She walked out of the room on legs that no longer felt attached to anything. Back at her desk, her ID card still worked, but barely. The internal drive access was already revoked. The calendar wiped, the email account disabled. Her laptop screen flickered once and then went dark. She sat staring at her reflection in the black glass, no tears, just the echo of her own words now weaponized against her. "He's just a hobbyist." The sentence that unmade her career. One Slack message at a time. She had tried to erase him with casual words. Now the company had returned the favor with clinical ones. The box on her desk was too small for what she had brought to this place, but too large for what she was taking away. A few framed photos, cropped smiles that looked like lies now. A cracked mug that said "The Boss Babe" in pink cursive, 2 pins she'd swiped from the HR desk without meaning to. The rest was digital, and that had already been erased. She moved mechanically, no flair, no last words, just the dull crinkle of severance papers folding into cardboard. No one said goodbye? Not really. A few glanced up as she passed, but quickly looked back at their monitors as if she were contagious. She couldn't blame them. You can only stand next to a burning house for so long before you smell like smoke. She rounded the corner near the lobby and saw the front window. Floor-to-ceiling glass. Once a symbol of openness, now a one-way mirror into her humiliation. Outside, standing as if he had all the time in the world, was her husband. Hands in his coat pockets, shoulders straight, head tilted slightly like he was watching a train derail in slow motion. He didn't wave, didn't move, just waited. She froze. He hadn't reached out once since that night in the kitchen. No calls, no texts, not even to gloat. And yet, somehow, she knew this wasn't accidental. He knew she'd be here today. He probably knew the exact time she'd be walking out. And now, there he was behind her. Footsteps. Her boss walked by, phone pressed to his ear. She turned just enough to watch it unfold. He was mid-call, nodding with a frown. Then came the pause, the kind that only happens when the other line delivers something too sharp to gloss over. He turned slowly toward the glass. He saw him. The recognition hit him like a wave. You could see it in his eyes the exact second he realized that the quiet, polite man his star employee had dismissed as just here had been everywhere all along. The man he thought was a harmless +1 was the platform's architect, the IP's owner, the reason his 6-month deal was in shambles, and the ghost behind every panicked investor call since Monday. Her boss lowered his hand slowly, his phone still open. His face turned the color of wet cement. Outside, her husband didn't smirk. He didn't gesture. He just stared. The silence between them cut deeper than any last word could have. And then, after a long, brutal beat, he turned and walked away. Not fast, not triumphant, just done. The glass held his afterimage for a moment longer. She stood there clutching her cardboard box with both hands, her breath held behind her ribs, surrounded by a company that no longer wanted her, in a career she could no longer save. No scandal, no headlines, just a soft, devastating erasure. He never raised his voice, he didn't need to. He had built in silence, and then, just as quietly, he had dismantled everything around her with a single clause and a look through the glass.